Brothers and sisters, this is my privilege to worship the Lord together with you. I am sorry for my English. I suffered a lot learning English, and now you will be suffering a lot listening to my English. I know after the service, many of you will come and say your English is great, I know, but it's hard to speak a different language. And I want to say thank you to you, Pastor Shane, for giving me this opportunity to share our story with you. Thank you to Dan and Jill Gilbert for your hospitality and your church for caring about Ukraine through the Outreach Foundation. We are blessed by your generosity and your compassion. This war has changed everything in our life in Ukraine. And everything we thought about war, all images that we had, they were wrong. This war is more wild than we expected, and suffering is deeper and bigger than we expected. And this war prompted us to rethink a lot of things in our life. And also, it prompts us to reread the Bible through a different lens. So it seems that most often our theology shape our life, but sometimes our life refines our theology and our convictions. And we are reading many texts from a different position, and it seems we have a different perspective on God, the church, ourselves, war, suffering, and healing. And I want to invite you to read this parable from the Ukrainian point of view. How this parable sounds in the context of suffering. And I choose this parable not to motivate you to be more generous. I am preaching this parable because you are already generous and supporting Ukraine. And this is my story. This is my journey through this parable. And I want to share lessons that I learned. Very soon you will be celebrating the Independence Day. You have this joy to celebrate independence, freedom, justice. Oh, how big dream we have in Ukraine to celebrate our freedom, our independence. And let me make clear that this war is not about the land or the territory. This war is about identity, freedom, justice, values, language. This is about the very existence of an ethnic group, of a nation. And unfortunately, under the Russian dominion, there is no space for the Ukrainian identity. So this is the reason why we fight as we fight, because for us, everything is clear. Fight or die. Jesus used parables as his way to communicate deep ideas and truth. And parables tells us about things that we think we know. And when we start this parable, we think, oh, everything is clear. We know how this will end. However, when we go through this story, we are kind of surprised. No, everything goes absolutely in a different direction. We are able to look to the things we knew from a different perspective. Parables do not give us answers, but rather reinforce our questions. And sometimes we think that this is we who are interpreting the parable. We are interpreting all of those characters. But then we realize that these characters, they are interpreting us. They reveal who we are. And it is great when we can see that we are looking like a positive character in the parable. And we can be a little bit embarrassed when we find ourselves in not very positive characters of the parable. You know, if we read the parable and we truly got its meaning, we can't remain the same. Because parables, they provoke us to change our lifestyle, to change our perspective. And in this parable, as well as in the other parables, small secondary details matters a lot. We are looking for main lessons However, small details, they help us to see main lessons. It is interesting that the teacher of the law asked a very obvious question: what shall I do to inherit an eternal life? And it seems like Jesus was surprised, like, wow, I am surprised to get this question from you. Like you know from Old Testament from your memory, you can quote it. Like, what are you asking about? And he wanted to justify himself and ask, who is my neighbor? And it's a big deal because very often we use neighborhood or who is my neighbor in an inclusive way, exclusive way. We want to exclude other people. But Jesus teaches us to think about who is my neighbor in an inclusive way. So let me share about several lessons I learned through this parable. First one, truth has good eyesight. Truth can see well, truth can see far. When we read this story, we can be quick to criticize a priest and a Levite. How they are so hard, they are so blind, they didn't help the one who is wounded. However, I want to a little bit protect them. They did according to the law, because it is the law who teaches them that they cannot touch the dead body, otherwise they will be unclean. And you can't participate in the worship as a priest if you are unclean. Can you imagine you are traveling from Jericho to Jerusalem, this is your turn to preach, to deliver your great sermon, and then because you touched the dead body, you lost that opportunity that you was waiting for a year maybe. If a priest conduct the service being unclean, he will be stoned. He will be killed. So they have a bigger business. They have to serve the Lord. And that person is dead. However, small details. That one was half dead. So if a priest or a Levite had a better sight, they could spend time, they could help, and yet be ready to serve. Sometimes we can quote entire chapters from our heart, from our memory, and yet we are not able to demonstrate compassion. We think that our righteousness leads us to exclude other people, but true righteousness is about include other people. They were concerned about how to serve the Lord, but they were blind to see that there is a chance to help. Well, I see a clear parallel with Ukraine. We were told that you have 3 days, well, maximum 6 days, and everything will be done. I want to tell you, my friends, that we are alive. Maybe we are half dead, but we are half alive. We are alive, and we continue our fight for our freedom, for our identity. Second lesson that I learned from this parable is about to be present where suffering is. It is interesting that Good Samaritan walked along that road. He was there. And it is, a little bit strange, if you see that somebody was robbed, your first instinct is to disappear, to drive faster, because it's clear, it's dangerous. But he was there and he helped. Maybe he was robbed as well in the past. So he knew what does it mean. What does it mean to be half dead while you are traveling? During this war, we learn how it is important to be right there as a church and to have the same scars, the same wounds our society has. Now the word evacuation means a lot because millions of people, they were evacuated. And sometimes our theology is like an evacuation theology. We are waiting when we will be evacuated from this world. But there is an alternative theology of presence. When you are present, when you are incarnated, the church cannot serve people without being among people. We walk the same path, but we have different destination. In Ukraine, we cry the same tears our society cry. We feel the same pain, and yet, in our eyes, there is a hope. We know that the Lord has the final word. I want to be honest with you, sometimes I hate hope. Because I realize if you need hope, it means you have a lot of trouble. Sometimes I feel, I would prefer not to have hope and have a better life. But when you are present, when you are in the midst, you can be an incarnated signs of God's presence. Sometimes we can think that Jesus is absent where suffering is. Sometimes I was 100% sure that Jesus is everywhere but not right here in the city of Bucha. However, later I realized when you look backward, you can see that Jesus was right there. And he was taking care about you, about your people in a very special way. So don't make final decision too quickly. When you go through your suffering, don't make decisions too quickly. Where is Jesus in this parable? I see him twice here. He is in the suffering one. If you remember in Matthew 25, I guess, Jesus says, when I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you give me food. When I was thirsty, you give me water. Jesus identified himself with the suffering one. And I can tell you, I could see Jesus in many Ukrainians who were suffering from the war. I remember reading Elie Wiesel. This is the man who went through the Nazi camp in Poland. And he says that one day, when 3 Jews were murdered, somebody asked where God is. And Elie Wiesel says, I heard a voice in my heart. He was there. He was killed there. I can tell you that I hear Jesus' voice when a volunteer asks people, how can we help you? And then when people say, thank you for helping us. So Jesus is in the suffering one because we are creating in his image. And also Jesus, I see Jesus in a Samaritan because he one who helps. I learned that Jesus always shows up where suffering is. And when church takes care about a suffering nation, when we support people and help provide food, people can see that Jesus takes care about them. They can see Jesus incarnated. One uniqueness of this story is compassion. It is strange for Jews that Samaritan has compassion. If you will study history of Jesus, very often when he healed a lot of people or fed a lot of people or taught them, he had compassion. I used to teach a lot about compassion in my missions class, how deep that feeling is, how must it lead to action. Now I have different description or definition of compassion. Compassion is to suffer together and suffer in the same way. It is when you have the same scars your society has. I was worried in the beginning that every person will ask me theological questions. Why this is happening? Where God is? I received only a few questions like that. I learned that in suffering, people are not looking for answers. They are looking for presence, for sympathy, and compassion. And I learned that our faith does not explain why suffering exists. Our faith, our theology help us to go through it. So when we speak with people, when we hear their terrible stories, we are silent. And sometimes everything what I can tell people, I tell them, my apartment was looted. My campus was hit by 6 missiles. I had to lead a funeral for graduates who were murdered. At one point, 99% of our faculty and staff, they were scattered around Ukraine and around the world. So I have no answers, but I know how painful it is. And I have a big vision for Ukrainian church in future, not because we will be strong, we will have a lot of resources, but first of all, because of our authenticity. We are authentic. When we speak with people, they can see scars on our body. We were right there. And Jesus is a great model because he was incarnated. He spoke our language. He suffered in this world. So when we ask him, when we speak with him, we are 100% sure that he understands us. It is interesting when Jesus showed up before disciples in that small and closed room, they were uncertain who is he. And then he showed his hand. I am so amazed. I would expect that Jesus would tell some stories that only he could knew. But he reveals them his scars. By his scars, they realized that it is Jesus. Compassion is to suffer together and to suffer in the same way. Compassion bypasses all borders. This parable does not say who was the wounded one, nothing about his religion, ethnicity, or social status. Now in Ukraine, every Ukrainian is our neighbor. In compassion brings these walls and build bridges. And you don't need to be a priest or a Levite to help. Everything you need to have is compassion. Another lesson that I learned, it is silent help. Interestingly, in this parable, the Samaritan does not say a word to the wounded one. He doesn't ask anything, doesn't teach anything. He doesn't even pray, at least out loud. Silently help. Our mission is not to provide answers to all questions, but to help as much as we can. And sometimes the most authentic and profound answer that we can have when we see human suffering is our silence. We just have no words. And very often, the most sincere expression of gratitude that we received from people we helped, it was a hug. Because, we are speaking not about improving people's life. We are speaking about their physical survival. And because of the mission of the church, thousands of people, they survived physically. And there are several groups that are extremely vulnerable. It is elderly people, people with disability, and orphans. Who will care about an orphan when his city is occupied, when his center is destroyed? And in such situation, church showed up. And Jesus was orchestrating the way how we could find people who really needed that help. I remember one day we got a message that there is a blind man in Kiev that needs help. If you are 75, you are a blind man, you live on a third floor, there is no grocery stores, no public transportation, how you will survive? And then from some people, we got message. This is the address. There is a person. He needs the help. I remember when we found that place, we brought food to him for several weeks, and he was trying to give us money. Like, how much does it cost? And because he is blind, he does not see where we are. And we say, no, 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 it's for free. How this can be for free? Well, God loves you and God cares about you. Silent help. Another lesson that I learned is how to be good and kind when nobody is watching. Truly good people and kind people, they are good even when nobody sees them. I have a small theory. I might be wrong, but I'm just projecting myself to a priest and Levite. Sometimes when I have a student in my car and I am asked for alms, for help, I remember all of those stories that it's not right to give money to people because they will use those money for drugs and alcohol. I remember all of that information, but students are here and I am a president and I want them thinking good about myself. So I always give. But my generosity is motivated not because I am generous and I want to help, because I am there's a social dependency. It is interesting that this Samaritan, he was able to help when nobody was looking on him, and even when it was dangerous. Truly good people do good even when it is dangerous. It is very ironic that somebody who was considered by Jews as unworthy, unclean, demonstrates compassion and shows mercy. And last lesson that I learned is about full help or complete help. I am surprised that a Samaritan provided the first medical help. He delivered the man to the hospital, paid for his stay, and promised to cover all of the cost. He provided enough funds to cover a week in a hotel. Why? Why would you care? Compassion. This war truly made every Ukrainian our neighbor. And I am so inspired and amazed how church is taking care about our nation. On 24th of February 2022, almost every single church turned to be a relief center. Millions of people have received help, evacuation, food, medicine, water through churches. And very often we have been asked, why do you come and help us? And when people ask, you can share that you are a Christian and God calls us to take care. I remember a testimony from one young gentleman when he said, I had nothing to do with religion. I never visited a church in my life. But when my city, Irpin, was occupied, all Ukrainian officials had to leave. Police, governance, army. And he said, the only institution that remained was the church. And church was a center where millions of people survived physically. I believe that church will have a great, and already has, great love and respect. And this authenticity will help us on a second stage of this war. We trust that the Lord will grant us freedom and just peace. I believe that God is just God. And then we know that there will be time for a lot of cry and tears, for lament, because we will learn how many thousands of Ukrainians have been killed and murdered. And then there will be another phase. We believe it will be time for trauma healing. And I see that this is the only church has capacity and calling from the Lord to facilitate this process of healing. And again, theology of presence is important because we have the same scars. We experience the same wounds, and we also experience healing from the Lord. And being that community or such community, I believe and I pray, we will be able to facilitate this process of trauma healing. There is a huge trauma in Ukraine, and only the Lord and His grace can heal us from this suffering. Dear friends, this is my story, my journey through this parable. And this parable is a challenge for me. Will I be able to serve my neighbors in a way that they will be helped? Will I have a good sight so I will see a need? And in my conclusion, I want to say that we are grateful to your support, for your generosity to our fellow citizens, for your hospitality that you demonstrated. But we are just in the middle of the war, in the middle of crisis. Our message to the Russian Federation is, leave us alone. If you want to restore the Soviet Union, may God bless you, but do it within your own borders. We had 70 years under Soviet Union. It was enough. We enjoy freedom. We enjoy democracy. We want to build such country. And our cry to the rest of the world, please do not leave us alone. Without your support from your government, we will not survive. And I want to ask you to pray for Ukraine. Everybody puts prayer as a first. However, I can tell you from my heart, when people ask me how it happened that Kiev survived, it was almost surrounded by the Russians. I tell them, I don't have non-religious explanation. The only explanation that works for me is it was the Lord. There was no other explanation how Russians they left area around Kiev. But still there is a war in Ukraine, and we are shelled every night and every day. So pray for us. Support our educational ministry and our relief ministry. I am so grateful to the Outreach Foundation for their global vision and understanding of mission as a holistic mission. We need to train pastors and leaders who are capable to serve in this context. We need to have people who can provide counseling and trauma healing in Ukraine. Support our relief ministry. There are thousands and thousands of people who are left behind, and they need our help. Share your expertise with us. In the area of chaplaincy and counseling, you have huge expertise that we don't have. And it's so strange for us. We have this story of being persecuted under Soviet Union, and now our government asks us to help with chaplaincy ministry. Share your competence with us. And last but not least, please be our voice. Do advocacy before your leadership, your governance. Make your leaders know that you care about Ukraine. We are so grateful that your government provided us some special equipment, and that equipment saves lives. So thank you very much for this privilege to share our story. And on behalf of our seminary and our churches, I want to say thank you. There is not a lot of reason for you to care about Ukraine. We are so far from you. But you care. And we are blessed and saved because of your faithfulness to the Lord. And may God bless you. Amen.